Good evening, everyone. So glad to see you. Welcome to Conversations with CAGT. We're waiting for some others to join us. Welcome to Colorado. We always like to know where people are from. If you have a chance to put your city, state, country, because I know we have people from outside the United States as well following us. We'd love to see where you're from. We're here with Judy Galbraith, and we're just letting some viewers come on right now. Good evening and welcome to Conversations with CAGT. I'm Mark Hess. I'm the president-elect of the Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented. So nice to see you. Our room is starting to fill up. Welcome from Fort Garland, Colorado, Cheryl. I'd like to remind everybody that you can access recordings of all these conversations with CAGT, an impressive lineup. And Judy Galbraith will be right at the top of that one. Glad to have her. But you can find all of these recordings on coloradogifted.org. You'll find the conversations with CAGT in one of the tabs at the ribbon at the beginning. As a board member of a nonprofit, I would hate to disappoint everybody out there by not mentioning that also while you're on coloradogifted.org, that you can find the donate button to work on next year's tax return and contribute to this wonderful program and this wonderful organization and the strongest advocate for gifted children in Colorado, Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented. Welcome. We've got a nice crowd out there. I'm going to go ahead and start, and we'll get to Judy Galbraith. Her presentation tonight is titled Decades of Common and Not So Common Comments and Questions from Gifted Kids. And Judy is the founder of Free Spirit Publishing, which specializes in self-help for kids books and other learning resources. She's co-author of the Gifted Teen Survival Guide, the Survival Guide for Gifted Kids, and When Gifted Kids Don't Have All the Answers. And those books have been a part of my classroom for as long as I've been teaching Gifted and Talented. And in 2015, Judy received the National Association for Gifted Children's Annemarie Roeper Global Awareness Award. Tonight, having served gifted children and teens for more than 30 years, Judy has learned most of what she knows about their social, emotional, and educational needs from the students themselves. And in this conversation, you'll hear some of their common remarks, as well as those that are unique and especially illuminating. More importantly, since your gifted children and students likely feel similarly, you'll have an opportunity to hear and share suggestions for responding. There's no more important time than now to address students' needs from the inside out in these times. Judy, I'm just going to say your name and the title one more time because I've got to hit this recording button, right? And make sure that we get a good recording here. So welcome everybody. Judy Galbraith presenting Decades of Common and Not So Common Comments and Questions from Gifted Kids.
Hello, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. And first want to thank all of you for the work that you do during these times. I've been a teacher, although it's been many, many years since I've been in the classroom, and it was hard then. And I can't even imagine the challenges that you all face today with at-home learning, hybrid learning, in school learning, and everything in between. So I want to personally say that the kids in your care appreciate everything you do, even if you're not aware of it at the time. And so thank you. And thank you for being here tonight. And I wanted to start out by saying that I've been surveying gifted kids from elementary through high school for more than 30 years. And at the end of my presentation, there will be a link to a survey that you can use with your students to find out where they are in terms of school and social relationships and family life and all kinds of other things. And that's the survey that I've developed over the years. And you should know that kids are very anxious to talk about some of the things related to growing up gifted, and often we don't ask them these questions. And in fact, in my original round of surveys, kids would write on the back. Of course, then surveys were done on paper. Can you imagine that? And not Survey Monkey. And they would write on the back and say, I didn't have enough room, and so I'm writing on the back, but I have so much more to say. So here's our telephone number. Would you please call me? And sometimes they would make comments about my questions like, I think this question is rather ambiguous. I think you should ask this instead. And so I kept finessing and improving my survey. And you can feel free to do the same if you decide to use it to find out where some of your students land. And with that, I'll let you know that the more common questions that kids have are reflected in what many of you have seen. Um, hang on one second. Hmm. I'm trying to get to screen share here. There we go. So many of you are probably, whoops, familiar with the 8 Great Gripes of Gifted Kids, which are in my survival guide for gifted kids. It's in its 4th edition, 3rd or 4th edition. I can't remember. Isn't that terrible? But these are the common kinds of things that I heard from kids over decades of surveying them. And number one has to do with a pullout program, or a program that takes kids away from their regular classroom. And sometimes they would feel almost sabotaged because the pullout class would happen at a time when something kind of cool was happening in their regular ed classroom. So that's something we need to be mindful of. And number two, it's almost as though if you're gifted, then you should have to do all these extra things because you're so smart, which actually is a disincentive to do well in school. It's sort of like a punishment for being smart. So I think educationally, we really need to pay attention to that. It shouldn't be more of, it should be different from or differentiated learning opportunities. And number three, while some kids naturally love to help other kids in class, some of them feel resentful for it. And I remember a student writing to me and saying, I've been a tutor in my classroom for 6 years and I'm tired of helping other people. I want to learn more myself. And so I think it's fine to engage kids in helping others when they seem to have a natural affinity to want to do that, but not sort of require it or push it. The stuff we do in school is too easy and it's boring. You all are aware of the fact that often the curriculum for gifted and talented students is too meager. And I've been corresponding with an 11-year-old who's from Germany recently, and she found my Gifted Kids Survival Guide on Amazon, but she couldn't buy the book because she doesn't have her own money in her credit card. And her parents, if this is true, if what the girl is telling me is true, don't want to talk to her about being gifted. And so I sent her a PDF of my book. And she talked a lot about how it's harder for her to do easy work than it is for her to do challenging work. And that's a really common thing that I've heard over the years. And we all know it's hard to concentrate on stuff that's dull. But if something is engaging and interesting to us, we have a lot more energy to put ourselves into that. Number 5 came up a lot. When we finish schoolwork early, we often aren't allowed to work ahead, and kids will write to me and say, well, what am I supposed to do? And then if I do work ahead anyway, then I just have to come back when there's a test for the material that was covered 3 weeks ago. And this is a great frustration. Our friends and classmates don't always understand us. They don't see all of our different sides. This is sort of speaks to the desynchronous development of some gifted children, where intellectually they may be 2, 3, 4 or more years ahead of their same age peers intellectually. Who knows where they might be emotionally, but sometimes they do feel misunderstood, and rightly so, because they're not on the same plane with their peers, and they don't necessarily have the social skills to navigate that. It's really tricky for adults, much less for kids. 7 speaks to perfectionism, and we're supposed to get A's and do our best all of the time. One girl wrote to me, and not only that, I'm supposed to be a perfect sister, a perfect babysitter, a perfect person. This is a huge amount of pressure, and something that has been recurring over the years in terms of a concern that these kids have. And number 8, tests, and more tests. And fortunately, schools are really evaluating, all right, how important are tests and which tests are important and for what reasons. And can we please not test kids to death? Because all kids are stressed out by tests for the most part, unless they're highly unusual. And so that's a complaint that has come up over the years. And now to the things that are a little less common. So what you're going to see in these next slides are excerpts from actual letters that I've gotten from kids. And one of the honors of being an author of a children's book is that I hear from my readers, which has always been such an honor. And today, more often than not, kids email me, like this young girl from Germany. But often I'll get batches of letters from kids who have been using the the survival guide for gifted kids, or the gifted teen survival guide in a class, and they'll write to me as a group. And so most of the time the letters are pretty long, so I've just put snippets of them. And one of the things that you might want to be thinking about is that you kind of have to play counselor or psychologist. In my case, I don't get to be with these children. They write to me out of the blue, and so I have to try to figure out what's going on with them, directly and indirectly, and how I can respond to them. But often these kids are really creative. So I liked what she said. When we read the part that you change words to make you feel better, we created some of our own, like dork, which stands for dedicated, organized, radical dude, or weird, with energy, intelligence, and responsible dude. And I think the telling part of this letter was, she said, it made me feel like I'm not in a dark corner anymore. And if I could summarize one thing that was sort of an overarching emotion that I hear from kids, is that often they feel like some sort of aberration of nature, that they're somehow not normal, and often they feel very alone. And that's one of the benefits of having gifted and talented programs and offerings for these kids, so that they can see they're not the only one who has so-called weird ideas, and who is a quick learner, and maybe is advanced in math or reading or some other subject area compared to their same age peers. And that sense of loneliness or differentness is a detriment to them. And so I think that these letters are illuminating in that way. I love Tony. I enjoyed your book. It helped me understand I'm not the only one in the world with giftedness. Also understand that gifted doesn't mean perfect. I don't have to be totally realistic, intelligent, serious, and super smart. I know that I can have days where I can just be lazy. And think of, okay, so Tony, by the way, is a fourth grader. And imagine the burden of feeling that you have to be totally realistic, intelligent, serious, and super smart all the time, and that can't have days where you can just be lazy. And um, talking with kids about a balance in life, as adults we talk about work life balance. Well, what does that look like for gifted kids? And if they have parents who are trying to schedule them into things 24/7, it's really tough on them, because parents may think that they're doing the best by their children by challenging them and having them in really interesting activities all the time. And yet, that's really not a balanced life. And we're setting kids up for a lot of anxiety and stress, or worse. And April 14, the thing I worry about most is knowing when to say when, not meaning when to say no to drugs. It's more like knowing when to be myself, my true self, and not putting up a facade. Sometimes I just don't feel good enough, like my regular self doesn't please everyone. I wonder why I care about what some people think. Um, but all I can do when I'm around other people is to please them. And of course, she's 14. She's an adolescent. And so when teens, are going through adolescence, it's very common for them to want to be like each other and to fit in. And so what kinds of conversations do we need to have with kids about what does it mean to be yourself, and what does it mean to not please others all the time, and what does it mean to not care what people think, and when are there times when it's appropriate to care what other people think. And these are the conversations that I think we as adults sometimes don't realize kids are capable of having or interested in. And in my experience, they're very interested in having these conversations. Here's another student who feels like an alien and asked, "What do you think of IQ tests? I took one online, but I don't know if its results are accurate or what the number means." And this is something a number of kids talked about. They were very curious about IQ. They hear about IQ, and your school may not administer IQ tests, but kids hear about them, and they can go online, as this student did, and take any number of tests. They get a score, and no one is there to help them put that score into perspective for good, bad, or otherwise. And I think it's really important for us to talk with kids about what intelligence is and what tests mean and what they don't mean. And IQ is a measure of your ability to do well on school type tasks. And it doesn't say anything about your creativity, your social skills, your leadership potential, or all kinds of other things. It is a measure of some kinds of intelligence. Um, but I think it's really important that we take the mystery out of tests, whether they're achievement tests or any other kinds of tests. I think kids need to know what the purpose of it is and what it means, and more important, what tests don't mean. And this one came from a girl who was a freshman in college. And she talks about the first time she got a C on anything was in college. And she was terrified because she had gotten A's all through high school. And she was certain that she was going to be in big trouble with her mother. And her mother asked her how she did. And she said, mostly C's, I think, an A in English. And her mom said, "Well, how do you feel about that?" "Well, I worked my butt off, so I feel pretty good," the girl said, hoping to deflect her rage. She sounded shocked and relieved. "Oh, good," she said. "I was worried you'd kill yourself." And the daughter says, "You're not mad?" "No," she said, "I'm relieved to see that you're human." And so this 19-year-old girl said, "It was a great moment, freeing me from years of childhood anxiety about failure. 3 C's and my mother still loved me." And This points to my recommendation that we always ask kids, so how do you feel about your report card? Because maybe they got B's and C's, but they worked really hard to get those grades in really tough subjects. Or maybe they didn't work all that hard because they were distracted about their parents getting divorced, or who knows, the myriad of other reasons. But the point isn't the A, the point is, what did you learn or what didn't you learn? And how can I help you be in a position where you can learn new things and where you can be your best self? Ashley and I had a long series of correspondences, and this was one of them. And I just would point to the middle paragraph. I've come across occurrences when I've wondered if my peers can actually comprehend what I'm saying. I do have a larger vocabulary than the majority of my grade. I use big words in most of my speech. However, when I talk to my friends in that manner, they look at me like I've spoken gibberish. I've noticed this, and I've said to my peers, if you don't understand what I'm saying, you can just ask. However, this method hasn't been very successful. No kidding. And her all in all question is, when should I or shouldn't I use my vocabulary? I don't want to seem like a geek or a nerd, but I also don't want to degrade myself. So Ashley's in a tough situation. You know, she does have this fantastic vocabulary and doesn't want to demean herself or put herself down, but she also doesn't want to alienate people. And her sensitivity is showing here. She really does care, and is struggling with this. And so, what does she need from us socially and emotionally, but educationally as well? And there's a time and a place for everything. And I talked with kids about how timing is everything. You know, sometimes you have to adjust how you are depending on who you're with. And if that means you get to be with a group of people that are kind of fun, but maybe they're not just like you, that's okay. And then maybe there are places where you can ramp it up and you are with people who are like, they're wordsmiths. I think about me, I'm in book publishing. I'm a wordsmith, and I live with my partner, Gary, and he's a terrible speller. I mean, he comes from an engineering background, which is not to say that all engineers are terrible spellers, but often he'll be trying to write something and he'll ask me how to spell a word. And if I constantly said to him, "Oh, you dummy, are you kidding? You don't know how to spell this?" Well, that relationship probably wouldn't last too long, right? So, anyway, that was Ashley. And this is the last letter that I want, a part of a letter that I wanted to share. Um, I actually spilled coffee on Andrew's original letter, so I've had to mock this up, but I think this was one of the really not so common letters. When you grow up after being a gifted child, can you still feel the effects of being of giftedness? Or do our gifts and talents fade away as we make the switch to adulthood? I've heard of some very smart kids who grew up to be ordinary Americans, and I wondered if this is a common happening. Now, Andrew's letter, again, I don't know Andrew, and I always write back to kids, always, but I don't have the benefit of having a conversation with him to ask, like, what do you consider an ordinary American? And what do you think you need to do so your gifts and talents don't fade away? And what do you think about feeling the effects of giftedness now and in the future? What kinds of decisions would you need to make or not make in order to continue being gifted and talented and having an interesting and a creative life? And all kinds of questions came into mind to me when I got this letter from Andrew, like, does he view his parents as ordinary Americans, and what do they do? And are they people who maybe dread Mondays and live for Fridays? And so he sees them hating their jobs in some way, or what else might be going on? I just had to guess. But you all are in a position where you can ask, you can have these conversations. And um, although Andrew's letter was, I think, more eloquently written for a lot of 12-year-olds, he has some really provocative and profound questions, I think. And having these conversations with kids is really rewarding, not just for them, but for us as well. And I don't think we should ever underestimate what's going on in their emotions and in their minds, because being gifted changes you in profound ways. And I would give the example of a 4 or 5 year old who is already reading, and they get to kindergarten where most of the kids are just learning their alphabet, and you can't help but wonder, oh gosh, I'm really different from these other kids. And most of the gifted kids who write to me don't conclude that they're just different from their same age peers. They conclude that there's something wrong with them. And a gift we can give all of them is to let them know, no, 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 this is a wonderful attribute. And although it may sometimes set you apart from people, it is a wonderful thing to develop and embrace. And helping other people feel comfortable around you when you can is great, but sometimes you can't. And I'm sure many of us have heard, I know I did growing up, oh, Judy, you're too smart for your own good. Well, what the heck does that mean? Like I should be less smart if it was, and that would be good for me. I've never understood those things. And so these kids very much need the opportunities to talk and journal and have the support of people like you who get it and who can help make a difference in their lives. And I know that sometimes we don't know if what we're doing on behalf of these kids is having any sort of a positive difference. Sometimes I would hear from students years later, and I remember early on in running Free Spirit, I had an intern. It was a college student from the University of Minnesota, a young man, and I only had like 4 employees at that time, and he helped doing whatever I needed him to help with, working in helping to ship books or answering the phone or whatever. And he was really, really smart, and but he was kind of goth and very introverted. And when he left, I never knew if he would turn out to be a rocket scientist or, a garbage collector, or something in between. I had no idea what would happen to him. And it was 15 years later when I got a letter from him, and he was living outside of Washington, D.C. And he saw a woman in a park when he was walking with his fiance and their dog that reminded him of me. And he wrote, I realized that I never told you what it meant to be an intern at your company. And so I'm telling you now that you taught me that work isn't just a place where you show up to get a paycheck. It can be a place where you're with interesting people doing good work, and that it can be inspiring and challenging. And and I thank you for that. And he actually was an editor at a high profile medical journal, and I was so happy finally hearing from him. But it only took 15 years. Talk about delayed gratification. Anyway, I will stop. It's been, I think, maybe half an hour. I don't have a clock in front of me. And entertain any questions you folks have. Oh, and this last slide, here's the link to a student questionnaire that I've developed over the years. Again, you should feel free to customize this depending on the age group of your students and your particular situation. So for example, if in your area, they're not using the label gifted, so okay, use all kinds of acronyms for gifted: high potential, high ability, able learners, you name it, whatever you want to use. I use gifted because I like to tell it like it is. But go to this link, you'll find the questionnaire, you can download it and see where your students stand in terms of some of the issues that I raise with them that over the years have been found to be of interest. And I encourage you to do that. And if you have any questions, by all means, contact me um, through our Free Spirits general website, helpforkids@freespirit.com. I'm also on Twitter. You can follow me there. I don't always tweet about gifted education topics, but I do stick pretty much to social and emotional learning and students in general. And then our website is just freespirit.com. But anytime you have questions or um, whatever you think I might be able to help with, I'm here to help. This is my life's mission, and I hope you'll take that in earnest because I mean it. And if your students write to me, like I said, I always write back. So thank you for listening, and I'm ready to entertain any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Judy. It's just when I've used these books for years and years, and one thing that's obvious is that they're coming from a place of from someone who loves gifted kids, and they come from the heart, and provide such wonderful insight into giftedness and for so many students in my classes over the years. And I think particularly my middle school kids, who seem to be in that transition time, that they've been just so valuable. And we recommend these books to our parents all the time in my school district. So, I want to say in person, thank you very much for writing these and for authoring such wonderful material for us.
I'll tell one little anecdote that might interest people, and that is that my first teaching position was as a sixth grade teacher in a middle school. And I don't know if it was fate or luck or serendipity or what, but that first year of teaching, which, you're happy to make it through the day without being in tears, right? Anyway, I had 6 really smart students in my class of about 28. And there was no gifted program or anything, but they were just done with their work ahead of anybody else all the time. And every weekend I would go home and I would divine to come up with some projects or activities that would stump these kids. And I never succeeded. And what got me involved in gifted education was realizing that these students were getting a short shrift out of education. And I was ill prepared to know how to help them because in my undergraduate studies, no one ever talked about gifted kids. I mean, I had to take special ed classes, but those were students who were struggling to learn, not students who were of high ability. And I had an epiphany and I thought, I have to learn how to meet these kids' needs in some semblance of reality, because otherwise I'm just not doing my job. And that's what launched me into my career and into this passion. And yeah, I've never looked back. It's always been really rewarding. And so I laud all of you who are involved with these kids because they need you. They need you.
Yeah. And when you say that at the end that they need you, it's one of those things that oftentimes people say, gifted kids are going to be all right. They'll just be all right on their own. They're gifted. Um, the letter from the girl who said she got 3 C's and her mother still loved her really struck me. And she had said in there that it freed her from years of childhood anxiety about failure, that getting those C's. Where do you think that feeling of anxiety and pressure, where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from different places. Um, we don't have any evidence that suggests that perfectionism and high expectations for yourself is genetic or it's the whole nature and nurture thing. Is it from parents, uh, or is it something within yourself? Is it society? I mean, we live in a very perfectionistic culture, right? Okay, so you see ads about the perfect body, the perfect clothes, the perfect look, the perfect whatever, and 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 also there are discrepancies in terms of how we talk about giftedness. So nobody has any compulsion about talking about a gifted athlete, but if you use that label related to somebody who has intellectual interests that are high, much less off the charts, then all of a sudden it becomes sort of a pejorative thing. And so I think we have to early on help kids temper rather than focusing on perfectionism, focusing on um, how you can keep learning and what you've learned from mistakes, and that mistakes are part of being human and that it's really okay. And so often we shame ourselves. Like you make a mistake and you're like, oh, how could I be so stupid? Instead of, whoops, well, I guess I won't do that again. And so I think as adults, we have to be really careful about how kids hear us talk about making mistakes. And first and foremost, when we make mistakes ourselves, and to not be pejorative, but rather accepting of, gosh, I have to look at that and really figure out what I can learn from this mistake. And also in terms of grades, um, that the girl that wrote about her vocabulary, she also wrote to me and said, once again, I've gotten straight A's on my report card and I don't feel anything. I don't jump up and down with excitement. It doesn't do anything for me because I didn't have to work hard at all to get those A's. But my friends would be ecstatic to get a report card like mine. But couldn't there be something higher than an A to strive for? So that you really had something to reach for. And so we kind of set kids up about the whole grade thing. And it's pretty easy to get good grades when you're a younger elementary, middle school, or even high school student, like this girl who's a freshman in college. You get at some point in high school or college, wherever, you're going to be with a bunch of other people who are pretty smart, and it's going to be harder. Hopefully, you've got teachers who are challenging, and helping kids to be kind to themselves, to give themselves some leeway to struggle. And when kids don't struggle for years and years in school, and then all of a sudden they hit something that is a struggle, they think they've lost IQ points or something. And in reality, it's a different situation. And maybe you haven't learned good study skills. Maybe you haven't learned time management because you never had to manage your time. All those things are really important to look at with kids. But I think it's really important that we work with every student, gifted and otherwise, to be humane, to love themselves, and to strive to do better and to learn more, but to not expect perfectionism, which is impossible. And there are those in gifted ed who believe in healthy perfectionism, which I think is a bunch of baloney. If you are a perfectionist, and I'm one, I can tell you there's nothing healthy about it. It's a struggle and it can be very painful. And you look at everything you do and you think, gosh, if only I'd have done this, I might have done a better job. And you're always second guessing yourself. And I struggle with it still, every day, every week. And as a boss, I can tell you, working for me when I was younger, when I was ultra perfectionistic, couldn't have been too fun. Because you set the bar so high, a mere mortal can't reach it. And so this is something we really have to pay attention to. And for this young woman who's now a freshman to have gone through years of anxiety about feeling a sense of, you know, worrying about not getting A's all the time, gosh, what a waste of energy and time. And I know that as an adult now that I'm an old lady, but I wish somebody had talked to me more about this when I was younger. And I think my life would have been a little bit easier, at least a little bit easier. And I'd like to think that we can do that for kids who suffer from those worries and fears.
I love what you say about helping kids understand how to be kind to themselves. That speaks volumes. We have a question from one of our listeners that says, "What advice would you give to parents and teachers who are observing elevated anxiety in their gifted children?"
Well, first of all, the last year, most people have suffered from heightened levels of anxiety, but there are a lot of resources out there. We have some, there are websites as well. I think teaching kids about mindfulness is really important. And sure, it's important to plan ahead and to look ahead, but living in the moment, I think, is one way to help people to calm themselves and to just even breathe. And I don't know about all of you, but sometimes I catch myself taking really shallow breaths. And we know what is needed in order for your brain to work well is a lot of oxygen rich blood going up there. Well, it can't get up there if you're taking shallow breaths all the time. So I think studying mindfulness, and I'm not a mindfulness expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I think some of the precepts are really logical and are time tested. And so teaching kids stress management, there's stress management isn't rocket science. It's getting regular exercise, doesn't matter what kind of exercise, being outside, especially now, um, being out in the sunshine or just even being out in the fresh air, even for 15 minutes a day makes all the difference in the world in terms of how you feel about your life. Healthy nutrition, teaching kids to reach for a piece of cheese and an apple instead of a candy bar. Why? Because a candy bar is going to give you a temporary high and then you're going to get dropped down here below an even keel. So teaching kids about nutrition, and not in a preachy way, but just in a logical, it's not to say we can never have a candy bar or never eat french fries, but what are the things that are going to fuel your body and your mind? And also learning how to talk about your feelings. We have a really limited vocabulary for feelings in our culture. Mad, sad, and glad is about as much as it gets. But there's a difference between being mad and being frustrated. And when you are mad, almost there are always feelings underneath that are more descriptive about what's going on with you. Disappointed. Disappointed is different from mad. Although being disappointed may manifest itself in terms of being angry, wanting to throw something. So, helping kids to have a rich feeling or emotional vocabulary so that they can really describe what's going on with them. Besides mad, sad, and glad, which isn't all that helpful, it doesn't really give us a lot of information. So, sorry, I'm not crying. I just have allergies. Anyway, so teaching about stress management, food, exercise, teaching relaxation, exercises like deep breathing, yoga, if you're into that. Personally, I can't do yoga because I wrecked my shoulder, so it just doesn't work for me. But could you do stretching or Tai Chi or some other kinds of things? And also developing social skills. I mean, we have a hard time talking about what's going on with us with people. And a part of it is about having social skills. And some gifted kids who are unique or who are just more introverted, and nothing wrong with being introverted, need help reaching out. And so when I would work on social skills with gifted kids, I started with basics, how to make small talk. Uh, Personally, I don't find small talk very gratifying. Someone says, "Hey, Judy, how are you?" And most of the time, they don't really care. And I'm not about to launch into, well, to be honest, I'm feeling really sad and lonely right now. You're not going to do that. You have to develop relationships by having small talk first. And so I encourage teaching kids to have a repertoire of like 10 basic questions they can ask anybody that aren't too personal, that aren't too revealing. Like, what did you do last weekend? Or what are you reading like now? Have you watched any good movies lately? Love that shirt. Where did you get it? Those kinds of things are the entree to a closer relationship, and those take time to develop. And these kids, some of them, a lot of my survey respondents, I'd say about half have pretty good social skills, another half wanted help developing social skills. And that's part of stress management and dealing with anxiety too. Do you have somebody in your life that you can say, I'm feeling really anxious right now. Will you go for a walk with me? Just those simple, basic kinds of things. And I think if you witness a child who has chronic anxiety, it's time to go and talk to the school counselor and say, here's what's happening. How can I help? What's the protocol? Can I call the parents and talk to them about this? Is this something that you can do? You have to make sure you follow a protocol, because the worst thing to do is to call up some parent and suggest that their child has mental health problems. Usually schools have processes for dealing with those things, but sometimes professional help is needed. And sometimes parents, that adage, you can't see the forest for the trees. I mean, after parent presentations, I always have one or two parents who come up and they wait till everybody else is gone and they describe a situation that their child that has gone on for months and months and months. And that it hasn't even occurred to them to get professional help. Can you close that door? Because I'm on a Zoom meeting. Can you close my door? I'm on a Zoom meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's all right, Daryl. Have a good night. Anyway, it's like they're struggling and struggling, and I'll suggest professional help, going to a counselor, and they kind of like shy away, like there's some personal flaw to doing that. And I think getting professional help is one of the biggest gifts you can give yourself and your child when you've been struggling with something and you're not making any progress. And somebody else can see what's going on and make suggestions that are really helpful that you may not be. I always say that I dig my proverbial grave deeper by trying to think things through. And I think getting professional help when it's needed is a real gift, and also shows courage. It shows real courage.
It strikes me about how so many of these social emotional issues are related. One goes to the next and is related to the other, and then flip flops into another position. And I love that you have practical tips for kids, like just the sentence starters, the conversation starters. So some just do not have that skill, and it's literally something that we could practice.
Right. One other suggestion I have, and I might have alluded to it earlier in my presentation, is I always encouraged my gifted students to keep journals. And not all of them would, but the ones that were more introverted were more likely to. And they'd have a spiral notebook, and I'd have them write in their journals what's going on in their lives and how is school and about their friends or whatever they wanted to write about. And then if they wanted, I invited them, but they didn't have to. I invited them to give me their journals on Fridays, and I'd return the journals to them on Mondays with comments. And I'd write little notes in the sidebars, and that was a great thing, because it became this sort of pen pal type thing that was between not all my students, but some of them. And it also cued me into the ones that were really struggling and how I might help them. And that was a really a useful activity and tool. And the kids that did it loved it, and they couldn't wait to get their journals back on Monday to see what I wrote back to them. And it wasn't something that took a lot of time. I thought it was kind of fun, and they did too. And if there was something serious in there, like I said, I would go to the school counselor or the school psychologist and get advice on how to handle it. But that's a suggestion, just something to try if you think it might work.
Yeah, wonderful. We're coming down to the end of our time. And Judy, thank you so much for your generosity in sharing your expertise and your stories and making us smile and making us think tonight. We so appreciate you being in the conversations with CAGT with us.
Anytime. Like I said, this is my life's work, and I'm happy to help whenever I can. And I just thank you all for the work that you do. And like I said, it's got to be really hard today, but the kids need you, and never forget that. Even though you may not have concrete evidence of the impact that you're having a positive impact. And I hate to say trust me, because that's an evil thing to say, but you are making a difference. And kids do write to me about their teachers, and what they appreciate about the ones that they feel supported by. And more often than not, it's not anything magical or costly or highfalutin. It's just caring. It's letting kids know that you respect them, you're there for them, and you're not going away.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful notes to end it on. And also, if you go to coloradogifted.org, you can retrieve all of these presentations in recordings. Next week on Tuesday, 1 week from today, on January 12th, we have Lisa Van Gemert for Executive Dysfunction, Making Things Better. So thank you for joining us tonight, everybody. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.